which is beautiful because people take their culture and their experience and they make it their own. They ain't waiting for nobody else to come in and lay the stuff at their feet. Now you follow this. No, we
Right.
went into the hills and developed our culture and whatnot. So there is a whole story now that's coming out on a white woman talking about African nations and coming up with some mess,
So,
a modern Tarzan, So we gotta have to deal with that.
so Dr. Jeffries and everyone, we are live. We've gone live. So I'd like for my team to, if you could please just go backstage. And thank you so much for your assistance. And we're going to get ready to start Tuesday Talk, even though there might be some people watching now.
Okay.
So,
Yes.
so thank you. If you could just remove yourself, if you could not just go turn your video off, if the two of you could remove yourself from the screen, thank you. I appreciate it. There we go. So, welcome to Tuesday Talk. And let me tell you something, people. Live, anytime you do something live, that's where it's at. It's after the preposition, and that's where it's at. So, welcome to Tuesday Talk. And if you were here at the very beginning, very, very beginning, then you saw two of the three people who are on my Tuesday Talk team.
Welcome.
I had Sinette Cheryl and Sen Lee. They were there. And Sen Sean, all from the Shrine of Ma'at. They are part of the Tuesday Talk team.
Automatic connection.
So we're getting ready to get started.
Well, we're started. We don't need no special signal. Now we start. As African people, we've been starting and moving and shaking the world. And it's been one of the greatest experiences of my life to be African, to move out of Negro-ness, move past blackness, and to take this globalness.
That's right.
Founding peoples of the universe. And anybody else coming near us and around us better know how to bow and put their head down gracefully and let this spirit move on through. Otherwise, we're going to run on over you. Okay. So you see, I got my little rap in there. Run on through. If you don't look out, we're going to run on over you.
That's right. That's
right.
The
professor? He even went to Harvard with a rap. Came out, he was going to the biggest university in America and got on the stage and started rapping.
Who was rapping, Dr. Jeffries?
Black students enjoyed it. They said, hey, this brother he just ain't a lecturer. He got something going here.
He got some bars.
Yes.
Okay. Well, before we get into Dr. Jeffries' new career as a rapper, I just want to give you some of his bio. Now, a lot of us know who Dr. Jeffries is, and we're going to get a little bit deeper into what he's done as we talk about Black Studies for this edition of Tuesday Talk. But let's read his bio so that we can have some of the particulars of what Dr. Jeffries has done. Okay. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, besides being a true blue living legend, is a political scientist, historian, educator, master teacher, and administrator, and a lifelong Pan-Africanist. He was born and raised in Newark, New Jersey, where as a young man, he first developed his leadership skills and Pan-African consciousness, being raised on a pablum of Booker T, W.E.B., and Garvey.
Hey, Marcus Garvey.
That's right. After receiving an excellent informal education in the nurturing community of Newark, and a formal education at outstanding universities in America and Europe, Dr. Jeffries has become a leading voice in the African-centered education movement. He is regarded as a foremost authority on Africa, having traveled to the continent, Latin America, and the Caribbean more than 100 times on various missions and projects. He speaks fluent French and has taken courses in Portuguese and Russian. Dr. Jeffries is currently the International Executive Director of the Organization of Afro-American Unity, the OAAU, international president of the World African Diaspora Union, WADU or WADU, presiding elder with his wife, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries, of ASCACC's Elders Council, ASCAC's Elder Council, and a leading champion of the worldwide Pan-African Federalist movement. Previous positions that he's held include founder, former vice president, and national president of the African Heritage Studies Association, or AHSA, founding director, vice president, and president of the Association for the Study of Classical African Civilizations, ASCAC, founding director, National Council for Black Studies, NCBS, founding chairman, Africana Studies for the City College of New York, also known as CUNY, and founding chairman, Black Studies at San Jose State College. Now, when I got his bio, I read some of the education, and Dr. Jeffries, I'm going to need a copy of some of these papers you wrote. I'm going to say them right now. He got his BA at Lafayette College in 1959. His honors research paper was The Urban Crisis Study of Intergroup Relations, the Rotary International Fellowship and Certificate of International Affairs, University of Lausanne, Switzerland, 1959 to 1960. He got his master's in arts in Columbia University in 1963. The thesis, the 4-year development plan of the Republic of Senegal. How interesting.
That's fantastic.
And his PhD at Columbia University in 1971, the thesis, Sub-National Politics in the Ivory Coast Republic. Like, how brilliant is Dr. Jeffries? It was so awesome to read all of this because it just gives you kind of some bullets of a skeletal structure of what he's learned, where he's been, who he knows, what he's done, and how it is that we have him here today. The first time I interviewed Dr. Jeffries, I told my mom, so she was like, Dr. Jeffries, I know who he is. She was so psyched that I was interviewing him. So anyway, random, that's not really that important. Well, it is because she's my mom, but anyway, whatever. So I'm just here to say that we definitely have a true living legend. Dr. Jeffries, welcome, even though we've been talking for about 10, 15 minutes already.
Well, it's a great pleasure to see our young people taking up the mantle, taking on the mantle and taking up the torch that has lit the world. In other words, Brother Charles has a symbol on his computer of the rise of the African family. And it shows, it's one of the most enormous statues in the world. There's nothing more significant. Then it's more important than the Statue of Liberty and then all these other things that we pay homage to.
Right.
But it's the rise not of a warrior or of a queen mother, it's the rise of the Black family. And the Black man is rising and holding his child up to the universe. And the Black man, while doing that with the child, is foundation, settling himself on the rock, which is the woman. And so it speaks volumes, just that statue. And the African leaders of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, in Addis Ababa is where they have their capital. They asked 10 of the leaders to come up with this symbol of who and what we are as Black people. And so it's just fantastic to be able to go and see this monster structure with these stairs going up, because you can go inside of it. And inside of it, it has a studio space for the children to act out the history. It has the great works of the great artists. I was in the lobby with Julius Garvey, Marcus Garvey's younger son, and I'm standing with him under the pictures of Malcolm, Garvey, Du Bois, Sekou Touré, Kwame Touré. It's just marvelous to see this living history speaking to us as we breathe and as we move through life. And so that's what we've got to move past a classroom Black studies to a world Black studies. And if you get a chance, to go to the museum in New York. They've taken a double museum, the Museum of Primitive Art, which has its space on Fifth Avenue, about 86th Street. And
Okay.
then as you go further down Fifth Avenue, you come to the Museum of Ancient Art. And that's about Egypt and the early history. And both of them have been combined into one statement to the world that African peoples are the foundation of the human family.
That's a fact.
The most wealthiest white folks, the most intelligent white folks, the most performing white folks have acknowledged we are it. And here we are trying to worry about it when we should be worrying about it. And
Right.
it is the truth of who we are. We're God's chosen. Everybody else claims it. We are it.
Right.
We laid the foundation for culture and civilization for the world. We didn't wait for some people to come out of the desert and give us some tablets and whatnot. We looked at the universe and came up with this whole question of astrology and cosmology and epistemology. Epistemology is taking that cosmology and that anthology and putting it in the being of the young child, male and female, or the young adult, male and female, or the chief or the queen mother, the male and female. The balance is what people have left us.
So, Dr. Jeffries, to have lived your life and been like on a straightforward path, to sum it up in two very general, huge words, Black liberation. How was your start in Newark, New Jersey, so instrumental and pivotal for you to be who you are today and have walked the path that you've walked your entire life? Tell us what Newark was like for you, that was like the soil for who you are.
Well, the beautiful thing is Newark is there, its history is there, and it ain't going nowhere.
Right.
Native populations met some pilgrim types in 1666 on the banks of the Passaic River. That's named of one of the tribes of so-called tribes of Native Americans is the Passaic. Another one of the tribes of New Jersey were the Hackensack.
Mm-hmm.
But all of these towns have been named after Native Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And it was in this mix that the Native Americans found a working relationship to train the people how to deal with the rivers and how to deal with fishing, how to deal with cultivation. So Newark has a fantastic history. And it's so close to the Big Apple, New York,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't have the monster problems of New York. On a scale, it's not comparable, but it played that particular role. When I grew up, we were proud of the Indian population, the Native population. Why? Because our mother told us. She said, "We're not only African American," and so and she began to nurse us with what? Booker T, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Marcus Garvey. And she wasn't going to leave it to chance. She wasn't going to let the school system handle it, because the school system was not strong enough to handle it. However, Newark has been a leader in African education.
Mm.
People don't realize that. Newark has been a leader in jazz and the music that came out of our soul. You can't leave the Whitney Houston family out, Queen Latifah's family out. You can't leave all of these others. Ras Baraka, the mayor of the town,
right.
His brother was a soul singer with poetry, etc., and planted himself in New York. But New York was too crowded with too much foolishness. So eventually he left that life and came back home and set up Spirit House in the middle of the Black community in Newark, New Jersey. And from there, he got the people who had an understanding of African values and African culture, and they produced a phenomena. And so Ras Baraka doesn't just come out of an ordinary family, he comes out of an extraordinary family. Leonard Jeffries doesn't come out of an ordinary family, he comes out of an extraordinary family.
Okay.
A family that bought land, a family that maintained the land, a family that's established businesses. When there was a depression, it wasn't a depression for us because the big sister who raised my father, Aunt Bessie, and Uncle Robert, they had a cleaners, they had a tailors, they would beautify people. And so Black folk, no matter how poor, when it comes to church, they go and looking fine. And so we never had to worry about not eating, roughing it. Every Sunday was our day of coming together. Every Sunday we got around in that dining room, we were overflowed, and the food was laid out. And because I was one of the older of the babies, they allowed me to sit at the table with the adults,
with the grown folks.
Table for the young people. And so we have to be able to understand that. That's the Georgia component. So my mother is Virginia, my father is Georgia, and they came up from North Carolina and South Carolina. That's why Newark was, when it comes to jazz and music like that, it's so wonderful that they built the Performing Arts Center right in the middle of downtown Newark.
Right.
Newark is also a center of Black athletics, not only Black music, but Black athletics. Baseball was a big thing. There was a Newark Eagles team that was, when I was growing up, it was the head of the Black league. And you'd get 20,000 people going to see them. Now there's a whole section of Newark that pays homage to these ball players. Mm-hmm. They built new homes in this area. And one street you come to is Larry Doby Way. He was a great ball player. He came from Patterson. Another street is Monty Irving. Monty Irving, a ball player for the Giants, they named this the most important park in Orange after Monty Irving. And of course, down the street from where I lived on 14th Street, down the street, you go past the church that we had to go to every Sunday for Sunday school. And then on Monday, we went with Mrs. Smith's class home, where she taught us how to be young people. But if you go past the church, Mount Sinai, you come to the corner, and that corner had a bar and package store and a restaurant. And it was set up by Don Newcomb, one of the first Black pitchers to come into the major leagues. So we lived with the life of these folks.
Right.
And that's and so my view is, you look at Newark in terms of villages. The African people created villages. So I grew up on 14th Street. That was a village. We're at 80 South 14th Street. Mm-hmm. Across the street were the Spellmans. And Mrs. Spellman, my mother and father stood with them when they got married, but she was the daughter of one of the Black leaders in New York who set up the Redeeming Holy Ghost Church. Okay. Bob Spellman, a year or so younger than me, he became a leader at Essex County College, and then his sister also went off to college to Central State in Ohio. And when they sent her off, he told my brother, he said, "Look, you out there at Central State, my sister's coming out there to Central State. You make sure you take care of her business," meaning make sure ain't no boys messing with her, make sure she's doing right. I mean, and so here you have this relationship with his mother, with a great Holy Ghost preacher, and here is Bob Spellman himself, an educator. And then next door to him was Percy Oliver, Percy Oliver and Nancy. Percy went into high. He went down south to become an educator, and
Uh-huh.
so and then Sammy Forster, who lived on the other side of the Spelmans, the biggest new school in New Jersey was built at the heart Martin Luther King Boulevard, and that school was named for Samuel Forster.
Okay.
Can you imagine that you see this village thing where we take care of each other?
You know, when I listen to my elders talk about segregation, that's basically what it was. It was a village where everyone knew each other and took care of each other,
That's right.
and was a family, whether it was by blood or by the fact that you were neighbors.
Mhm.
And I used to love to hear those stories because having an intact community is something that we had just one generation ago, at
Yes.
least from my perspective, one generation ago. I guess it's a couple generations now for some people, and some people don't even know that existed. And I'm talking about Black American kids whose families are who have been in this country for generations upon
Right.
generation, don't even know that one or two generations from their vantage point we were intact and functioning and
Right.
had this type of success. So, it sounds like you definitely were the child of Newark in terms of the Black excellence, and the that was the soil that nurtured you. um, and it's apparent because your presence and the things that you've done have taught so many. When I was speaking with Brother Charles Asukile earlier, I mentioned the executive director of the Organization of Afro American Unity. Can you give us a little bit of background on that, and how is that functioning today? And then also three, how can we as a younger generation get involved with that particular organization?
Well, in order for us to survive, you have to have organizations.
That's
And
right.
so that was clear. Black folks, even if they had to go off into the woods, because white folks wouldn't let them pray peacefully,
Right.
they would go off in the woods and carve out a little prayer uh, in the woods. And in fact, I was shocked. I knew it happened in the South, in Virginia and other places. But when I went up to Martha's Vineyard, my brother took us up to Martha Vineyard last year. And when we had a chance to take a tour of Martha Vineyard, where a lot of white folks go to get tans and a lot of black folks go to show off, and it has a big history. But the driver of the bus who took us, he knew me and he admired me as a young kid growing up in Newark. And so he said, I'm going to give you the tour of tours. You don't even have to pay. You'll just hold on to the bus. Oh my God, he took us everywhere. He took us where Paul Robeson had been. He took us where W.E.B. Du Bois and others had been, where black folks had a big house there, but they kept the woods because that's where they had to hide their religious traditions and whatnot.
That's right.
And, and so I'm saying that we have to understand and appreciate our survival history, but
That's
not just survival, but thriving. And not just thriving, but creating a power force that has the whole world now quivering and shaking. What's going to happen with the world when these black folks are still awake, still woke? We thought we had put them to sleep. We done drugged them. We done put some crazy music in there where they're shaking their behinds, don't know what they're doing, but they're just shaking their behinds.
amazing.
And but there's enough of the rightness coming out of this whole process. The woman that headed the major league team in North Manly, there's a whole monument to her and the team. This is a woman who was a businesswoman. She handled the black team, and they played against Kansas City and Cleveland and Chicago, etc. And one of the first key black newspapers came out. One of the Afro-American newspapers came out of Newark. So I'm saying that hey, let's see each other for who we are, family, and
Right.
let's make it work. Let's make it work. One of my um, most important things that I learned in Newark was that there are societies of secrets. And that, Society of Secrets. Are you talking about spookism? No. You got the Shrine of Ma'at. And that was a temple of worship and transformation. And so my mother grew up as an Eastern Star. Her father, I was born on his birthday, January 19th, 1937. And he was a part of the Masonic Lodge. And so we have to understand that our people took some of that which came out of the Nile and used it to create these institutions of survival for us. They just had a beautiful um, celebration of Jackie Robinson. Now, all of us little black kids, when Jackie broke into the major league, we said, "Hey, we're gonna be like Jackie." I was played baseball in my high school and whatnot, and my brother, he was shooting to go. My younger brother to go down to down south. Well, he went to uh, uh, Ohio, but we were all thought we were going to be Jackie Robinsons, and and he was the type of person with his beautiful wife. They opened up a museum in New York just recently, and it is an extraordinary thing, and there's so much footage. And when you read the story of Jackie, then you see how important was his wife to keep him going. But it wasn't just his wife; he had a whole family of athletes.
Right.
And then
Right.
they left Alabama. Can you imagine Cairo, Alabama? They left and they went west, like white folks went west to push out the Indians and take over their land. But they went west for more opportunities, and they went to Pasadena, California.
Mm-hmm.
And so he went to the college UCLA and he was a star. But who was his inspiration? His brother Mac. And his brother Mac ran in the Olympics with the Nazis and Hitler in a stadium of 250,000 Germans jumping up and down talking about what they was. But then when these black brothers came out, and unfortunately they took out Morty Reisner or something, the little white fellow who was part of the American team, but they didn't want the Germans to have no excuse. So they asked him to step aside. He became, for the next 50 years, a broadcaster. But they took him out and put in another black one. These black men ran the Germans into the ground. And to see them stepping past the Germans, one of the black was almost on top of the other. There was 1-2-2. Oh, my God. And Hitler refused. He left the stadium with 250,000 of his people because the German Superman had taken a beating. And that not only followed the sports field and baseball, took a beating. I grew up with Joe Louis right around the corner. Joe Louis, I could just see him boxing and beating the white folks up. I mean, look, what we gonna say? We when we tap into our own, we got something. If we tap away from it, we weaken ourselves.
Definitely. I love hearing some of the anecdotes that you use. They're so visual, and we know who these people are from history, and we're able to see this as it progresses. Can you I had spoken briefly.
Now, my oldest cousin,
Mm-hmm.
Jesse, he was tall. The Jeffries are tall. My mother is short, so I came out in the middle. But Jesse wanted to become a medical doctor, but he met this beautiful sister, Elaine, and once they started romancing, he couldn't go on to medical school because their first child was twins. So that, but Jesse became a medical specialist, and his wife became a nurse. But Jesse got also involved in real estate. And so we were at 14th Street. That was a village. And then 12th Street, 13th Street was where part of our family was. And 12th Street was where my Aunt Bessie was. But 15th Street was East Orange, and 16th Street. Jesse took his African inspiration from me going back and forth to Africa, and he created new housing, town housing, and they called it Kazuri Kijiji, Sweet African Village.
Mm.
You see, so we were living it no matter where. Here it was, and when we went to Akron, Ohio, the same thing. Our people out there were heavy into the traditions and the culture. And in fact, we just celebrated yesterday my oldest cousin. She's 95, but it was her father who, when our grandfather and her grandfather was murdered by the Klan, that didn't pull us down. That raised us up.
That's right.
Because he was such a powerful figure that the whole family came together and the distant families came together. And his tombstone is still there in the graveyard. It's a Tekken. It's the tallest tombstone in the graveyard, and it has the Masonic symbols of Ma'at and all of that on the tombstone.
Mm-hmm.
So one of his oldest sons was asked to come back home, come back down south, and keep the family and the land together. And so that's what we've inherited. And we don't need to look in no comic books to find no Tarzan. I was after that. I knew that game wasn't right from the very beginning because I was the leader of my little white boys. We had a gang of 4 white boys: Michael Jacobson, a Jew; Billy Curran, Irish; Anthony Serrato, Italian; and me, and then Latinos.
Y'all had everybody.
We had that mix, and they loved me. They loved me to death. That's why they voted me president of the class.
How can anyone not ever love Dr. Leonard Jeffries?
Well, the thing is, and then not only did they do that, but Anthony, his father was a plumber. And so the white folks started moving further over the hills up into South Orange and West Orange. Well, Anthony wrote in my book when we were graduating, the first Negro president. And he wasn't talking about the president of some doo-doo this and doo-doo that. He was talking about the president of the United States. And then when he got a position up in the mountains handling a big arena, etc., he made sure that my cousin Jesse's son got a job there, and he helped to take care of him like it was his own. You know, so that's why I'm saying that we need to learn how to take that strength that our people have been giving us and make it work for us. Jackie Robinson's son, David, he lost one of his sons who had gone to the Vietnam War and got involved with a whole lot of drugs that the Vietnam our soldiers got involved in.
Right.
When he lost that son, I wrote him a letter. I said, Mr. Jackie Robinson, you may have lost a son, but there are millions of us who are your sons. I mean, I was that close to Jackie. Now his son David, who got the African bug in Tanzania, East Africa, married a Tanzanian woman. She lived up in the mountains, and they began to produce like Africans. They started having children, so I think they have about 10 or 12. And, but up in the mountains, they put 300 co-ops together, and those 300 co-ops were coffee-making co-ops. And he used my lawyer, Joseph Fleming, as his lawyer as he marketed. And when we went to last week, we went to see the exhibit. There was coffee from his plantation. And years before, I was asked to speak at a school named for Jackie Robinson. And the people asked me, and I said, of course, I'll be glad to speak. they said, is there any possibility that you could get David Robinson? He's in town. So I said, I'll call him. And I called David, and he said that, yes, he would be glad to be there with me. And so what happened was, with these wives, this wife and these babies, he called me early in the morning. He said, I don't think I may not make it. I'm in the hospital. We're expecting another one. And so, and so he did. I mean, in other words, he was sincere about wanting to be there with me, but the babies come first.
The babies come first. I understand that. So, Dr. Jeffries?
I was just looking for the book. It's probably over there. That Jackie Robinson's, a fellow wrote a story on Jackie, and he signed it as a tribute to me, and then under it, Jackie's wife signed it.
Oh,
and I didn't even remember. That's a collector's item. In fact, if I'm around and it's time for me to make my transition, and they do have a ceremony or something like that, and they do have a coffin or whatever they have, I don't want flowers. Put a few flowers around because that's the tradition. But in that cave, in that casket with me, I want the books. The books are the thing. The books turn the world around. I want 10 books. And one of them, I want Jackie Robinson's story that his wife signed and showing me some love. And then I want something from Marcus Garvey, because Marcus Garvey's son, the oldest son, when my wife and I left this house, it's a beautiful house for us because it has so much space. We would walk out of here for a walk, and we go 4 blocks down from the house. We pass the park, and we turn at Hamilton's street, and then the second house was Garvey. We would knock on the door. His wife would come to the peephole and look out there, and then she started yelling and screaming, the Jeffries are here, the Jeffries are here. And we would be in there for 4 hours, supposed to be getting exercise. We sitting on our butt with Garvey, and then we would go on back home. In other words, the life that some of us have had is so magnificent. When I was a kid and they played, well, we had to sit up in the balcony, and our white friends could go down in the lodge. But when the lights went out, we said, "To hell with these folks, these ushers." We went down and sat with our with our white buddies. So you had black and white down in the theater.
It sounds so crazy nowadays.
But and here they had these cowboys and Indian movies, and I got tired of these damn cowboys winning every time. I said, it can't be. You can't. And I remember Yellow Hand was in there with one of these cowboys, and Yellow Hand had his axe, and he was chopping at water and stuff like that. And then they went down together, and then who comes up? The white boy comes up. I said, no, all this crazy, I know. I went back to my backyard, my aunt's backyard, and I told my brother, we're going to play, what do the kids play? Games. And so I said, look, we're going to play Cowboys and Indians, and I'm going to make you the cowboy. And he loved me so. He just was so glad to be having his older brother going to weave him in. I'm going to say, but your role is to play the cowboy. So that means I got to tie you to a tree.
I knew you were going to do something.
And then I got to take my tomahawk and go hooping and hopping around you and chop you up into pieces. My brother loved me so. He said, all right. Now, we used to do that. And when we got into another house, someone bought the house that we were in, and so we went to, we got a place on 4th Street.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here we are growing now. We're getting bigger. Who's still playing Cowboys and Indians?
You and your brother?
me and my brother, and who's still letting me do it?
Your
And
younger
so, but we're not outside in the backyard, although we had a big backyard.
brother.
But he's in a chair in the living room, and I'm hooping and hollering, ooh, and humming, hawking him, and he fell over. He should have just let me do my hooping and hollering, but he kept moving and moving. The thing toppled over. I didn't know what to do. My mother was in the kitchen preparing food. She saw her baby dying. She rushed in there, pushed me out of the way, and saved her baby. And ever since
Was
then,
he getting ready to die, Dr. Jeffries?
hey, I had choked him all the way up to the chair. I mean, it's ridiculous. What what older brothers will do, take advantage of younger brothers. And younger brothers want to be like their older brothers. So they let them do these abusive things, But no, I've learned from that. And then my brother would always tell the truth.
That wasn't in your bio, Dr. Jeffries.
We had a big couch. My mother liked fancy drapes and couches and stuff.
Right.
And so I'm playing stickball and baseball when we can get to the field. But in the meantime, I'm in the living room taking a baseball, throwing it at the couch.
Oh,
well, goodness. when it hit the couch, that was all right. But one day I didn't hit the couch. It went through the picture window, boof. And then, oh my God, I was in trouble. But I knew how to lie. And so I told my mother, the white kids down the street was throwing bricks.
Blame it on your white friend.
My brother said, that ain't what happened. I told him, shut up. But he had to tell the truth. And so I got maybe one of my rare whippings. I had to take it, they take you out in the back and then, take your trousers down. And we're in the city now. We ain't no country folk, but they knew how to put that country whippings on. But my mother's older sister, we didn't have to worry about that. Her husband was smart. He was from Virginia, Booker, and not Booker T. Washington. However, he had a strap on his door. When you went out of his house, you passed that strap with 9 lives or whatever they call it. And that strap told you, have a good time, but don't overdo it. And I had to take and follow that, because when I saw his oldest daughter, who was an angel for us and took us to school for over a 3-year period, she from Down Neck, Newark, in the industrial area, all the way to Newark, DC, took us to school. We never missed a day of school, even in the great blizzard. We didn't miss it.
Right.
When I saw DC get a beating, I said, that ain't right. She's a princess. She's a saintess. She's I said, if she can get a beating, then you better be right, because Wilson don't play no games and stuff.
No games.
No games. No
So
games.
that also, once again, that sounds so amazing and nurturing and supportive and safe, to grow up in a community like that, and also with your family, and the abuse of your younger brother that he willingly withstood.
Don't tell nobody. So don't let this go out spreading too far. He should have. He said, well, that wasn't the worst thing. I said, Jeff. Well, the beautiful thing was we had these Italian neighbors and Irish and German neighbors, and all of us lived together. Mm-hmm. But when we went to the high school, it had these Italian gangs. Mm-hmm. And these kids were, they weren't too smart, and they had their little gang jackets and stuff. And they tried to intimidate Black people, but they couldn't intimidate us. And they told us, because we had problems with the Black older boys, they would throw us in the lake as part of our initiation. We would fight them or run past them. And then we would get to the school and hear these white boys saying, you can't go into this main door here. You got to go through the project door. Well, I know project door, but the Baxter Terrace projects built named after a Black man who was the head of the first Black school. The Baxter Terrace projects were south of the school. So they told us, you need to go around. Your door is to come through the southern door. I said, I know. I ain't heard no mess like that, and I ain't going to do it. So my Italian friends called up my brother and I and said, meet us at the Marconi Club, 2 doors down from our house. And we went there. And there were 2 limousines in front of the Marconi Club. And they told me and my brother to get in one. And they put our Italian friends in another. And then we went off to the high school. Now, when we made that turn at Park Avenue and to go along Ridge, and there's a beautiful park, Grant's Park, the mafia men got out of the car and started running alongside of it. And the thing that flashed into my mind was when Kennedy was shot. And the people got out of the limousines and they were running alongside of it, trying to protect Kennedy as best they could. And he was in the dying in the limousines. Well, these guys told our Italian enemies to go in, our Italian friends to go in and get the gang leaders. And they did. And about 80 or 90, 100 of them came out.
Wow.
And then they told us, get out the car and have a good day. And so the Jeffries boys got out the car and walked through 100 rabid white boys who worshiped the mob. And so they say if the mob could put their protective hand on us, we better pay heed. And they did. That's one of my great stories. And it was, in fact, my brother had come in another day and he was going in the door that we were not supposed to go in, and somebody threw a rock. So here's 100 of them. Somebody throws a rock. Here's my brother by himself. He turns around to them and he said, who threw the rock? Who got the strength to come on up and get in my face? And not a single one of them did. Because we wasn't just representing the little black kids. We was representing the mob. Hey, goodness gracious.
I absolutely 100% was not expecting a mob story tonight. And talking about talking with you, Dr. Jeffries, that I love these stories. They're just so I can just envision all of this. It looks like the earlier scenes in like Goodfellas or
Yeah.
Goodfellas or something like
That's
that.
right.
So, you know, I do want to ask you this question about the Black Studies at CUNY and at City College. Professor Smalls and I talked about that briefly before. And just hearing the establishment of Black Studies is something that's really important. Just like you, I was taught Black history from my parents and, you know, taught it at such an early age that I don't necessarily have clear memories of who told me what, when, and where, etc. But
Right.
it's unfortunate that there has to be this fight to educate the truth, because the reality of it is Black American history is American history. There is no America without the enslaved Africans who came here
Yes.
and, you know, worked this land and created this wealth that is a part of Europe's wealth, that was a part of the transatlantic slave trade and enslavement trade. And, you know, our ancestors who are here and who were dispersed were part of building the European wealth. And then now, not now, but then after all of that, the truth of it has to be fought for. So can you give us a little bit of a timeline of what, let's take, like we were saying, City College, what City College was like before there was Black Studies, the fight that was needed in order to have it there, and what is the state of Black Studies now? Is it still recognized as Black Studies, or are people acknowledging that this is American history?
Well, very good question, and it's important. I want to get an example that we need to. Black Studies is a misnomer,
That's right.
and so we can, you know, utilize it to explain how deeper it is. Black is in reference to melanin. And so we need to be proud that we are melanized, because without this pigment melanin, we couldn't stay on a sun-drenched continent.
That's right.
Sun-drenched polarity, meaning
Let's see if I can share. Can I share the screen?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, do I need to um give it to you? Hold on. Let me see. Share which screen do you want me to share? You know what? Let me zoom in on Dr. Jeffries. Is that what you want me to do, Asupile?
Hold on a second. Let me. What y'all keep talking. What I'm going to do is pull up this image that he wants so you can see it better.
Do you want me to go solo with Dr. Jeffries? Like have it just be him? Or
No,
you
y'all keep talking. Y'all just keep talking. I'll pull it up in a minute to share why he's talking.
okay.
yes. Now, do you see what we see?
It's
Yes.
it's I mean, I know what the picture is because I've seen it before, but that's not completely clear. So what I'm asking is, you're gonna get a different picture of what Dr. Jeffries is holding?
Yes.
Okay. I'm slow, y'all. I didn't go to City College, so sorry.
Okay. Now, that's it from afar.
Right.
But do you see what I see? There's some steps leading up to the monument. And thousands of students sit on those steps while we have important affairs so they can participate with the heads of state and whatnot. And then you at the bottom of the monument, you have the doors to go inside. And inside you can take an elevator which goes through the powerful thighs of the black man up into his heart and his shoulders and into his head as he leans on his strength, the black woman.
That's right.
And holds up to the world the sacred product of her womb.
That's right. That's right.
And that child is not playing with his dad. He's not crying for his mama. The child is pointing across the Atlantic Ocean to African peoples in the New World. And the child is saying that we are one. So we've gone past Black studies to deal with African world studies. And so that's why I said that the last time I was at this monument, I had a chance to go on the elevator and go into the mind of the black man and look out on the world. And some people say, oh, the woman's dress the wind has blown it up too high. That's true. They could have kept it down by her knees. So if Muslims feel that there's an insult there, I can understand that. But they're not. That wasn't the objective. The objective was to create this sign of a rising force. And that's why I talk about the African Renaissance. And that African Renaissance is the rebirth of African greatness. And the last time I was there for a big activity, I was asked to bring in 350 of our best in America. And we brought them. And each of them participated in panels and did fantastic jobs. At the same time, heads of state came and they sat near us. So the African family is the beautiful thing. And when you go up into the top and look out, you can see all the land around where the French used to have military bases and whatnot. All that land has been confiscated by the Senegalese government to build new housing for the people.
That's
so
right.
They're creating a new city of God in that area. And at one point years ago, they wanted to tear down the slums, which was a good idea, but they wanted to put up a new housing. And African housing is not just a building, it's several buildings and it's a courtyard and it's a place where you can grow a little something, et cetera, et cetera. So the people, some of the people in France, French people wanted to build these modern bungalows, but the Senegalese got them to compromise. You have to expand that buffalo to have a courtyard so several buildings can be constructed. And besides, you have the big cathedral, and what we insist upon is a grand mosque. a super beautiful mosque community.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did. They got the Moroccans who are specialists in building these mosques, and they built the Grand Mosque of Tuba. And the Tuba Muslims have created their own Muslim stream of knowledge and whatnot. So you're talking about African self-determination, African self-perpetuation, African self-development in its ultimate, in the ultimate sense. So that I'm glad that you're able to get a little bit of us, of this process in, and our people need to understand that Tarzan is a myth. It's white folks playing with themselves. When we're in a more sophisticated audience, we would talk about masturbation, playing with oneself. But this is not about that. This is about reforming oneself, refashioning oneself, reconstructing oneself. And Renaissance means rebirth, rebirthing a new, powerful
That's right.
presence on the planet Earth. And if necessary, we'll fly out to some other planets and see whether we need to plant some fertile soil there.
Thank you for sharing that. Now, where exactly is this, or what's the name of the statue? So if people want to do research on it, maybe go visit.
Yes, it's the African Renaissance statue.
Okay.
And it's really not a statue, but it's because it involves three people. But it's the African Renaissance memorial or monument. And Senegal is a very active place. It has Dakar is a thriving modern city. It has Gorée off of Dakar, which was a slave island where they had the House of Slaves, the Door of No Return, etc. Just like they have in Ghana, the great Elmina Castle dungeon. Thousands of our people were held, and not too far from it, across the bay, you could see Cape Coast, so-called castle and dungeon. Cape Coast was where the British held forth, and Elmina was where the Dutch held forth. But the Africans now have control of their own destiny, and they're doing a monumental job in putting together what I'm calling these new cities of God. The president of the Ivory Coast, the president of Ghana, the presidents of Nigeria, all of them built new cities of God. The president of Brazil built Brasilia. They have great cities in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, and all of the other great cities. No, but they needed a sacred city. So they went into the rainforest in Brazil, and Brazil has the largest rainforest in the world. When I flew over to go down to Rio or Buenos Aires, we went for hours. We were flying over nothing but green land mass. And so, but when the Brazilians wanted to move their culture in a wider way, they built this new city, got some of the great architects to help design it. And so we always try to go to Brasilia. Ghana, when Nkrumah was the leader, he came for education to America. And Nkrumah saw the new buildings of the American community. And he said, well, when we build a new city leader of Ghana, we need to follow that model. Build a new city. We need to take the dam, Tema. And I went there in 1961. I was so excited. We're going to see a big city and all this. And when we got there, we saw big placards that said, look ahead and you'll see a mountain range. That mountain range will be connected. One side of the mountain range will come together with a great dam to link the other side. So there'll be a 150-mile lake that can provide water power and a great smelter and dam. And so I said, these people didn't even have good roads. I'm riding around 7 African countries in these bad roads. And how are they going to build this? This is sheer nonsense. They dreaming. I'll be damned if over the next 10 years, and Nkrumah built a new city, housing, new factories, new ports, the lake and whatnot. And so a dream fulfilled. And he was inspired by coming to America and being educated with Black Americans who had dreams. But Bunny next door did the same thing, and he used the Rosicrucian movement, which comes out of Kemet, Rose Kwa, which has to do with Akhenaten and his mother, Queen T. And so in Ivory Coast, they came up with the same plan of linking the ancient history with the modern history. They built a cathedral, a basilica. They went past the cathedral to build a basilica, and they named it the Basilica of Our Lady of Peace. Now, people said that Ophir Bunny was building to grandiose himself. No, he had a big palace. He had a big mansion. He was a wealthy farmer. But he was trying to tap into the world movement of Akhenaten, the pharaoh whose wife left such a legacy. And his wife was his mother, Queen T, and his wife was Nefertari. And his younger brother was King Tutankhamun. And so, but the president of Ivory Coast wanted to build schools. So he built 4 universities, miles apart, but there they were. He built a scientific high school for 6,000 students, many of them women. Women do not get that type of education in the so-called third world, in Asia, in India, in Indonesia, in the islands of the Pacific, and in South Africa. But the African wanted to show that the women needed to be trained. And this is the Basilica of Our Lady of humanity. And so when Leon Sullivan had his progress movement, we hooked up with him. We went to Newark. We said, we need to join this development of business. And so we went to Philadelphia, talked to him, and he said he was setting up a supermarket and a Progress Plaza. I said, we went down to Philly to study him, and we bought land for a supermarket and other developmental things. But one of our group kept saying, you're not taking everything into consideration. We said, Hickman, why do you keep saying that? We've got plans here. We've got blueprints. We've got architects. We are taking everything into consideration. And finally, when the project was almost completed, we finally got the real word. He said, you have to talk to the big boys in the city hall. We said, big boys in the city hall, what do they have to do with our project? And then he let it out. The mob, the Italian mafia, controls Newark, New Jersey. They control every building, big building that's being built. Every project, they get their share. And they have said that because we are new at this thing, even though we went out to a conference in Chicago of 3,000 shopping center builders, we were serious about it. What he was saying was, you see that building not far from where we are and back at City Hall? We said, yeah. And he said, that's the Federalist Building, one of the taller buildings in that part of Newark. He said, who do you think built that building? I said, you're saying the mob built the Federalist Building in America? He said, yes. And they had to debug every room in that damn building because the mob had bugged it. So we got a reality check when we grew up in Newark. And that has been a great part of me comparing Newark with other development countries. Liberia has difficulty, but it has potential. Sierra Leone has enormous potential because they had diamonds and gold and stuff. And Liberia was famous for it was an easy planting of the rubber trees, and that's where Firestone and all of the big tire makers and automobile makers got support from controlling millions of acres of land. But now there are Black people like those who run the Marcus Garvey's organization, the UNIA. They are now trying to Africanize Liberia. Others are working in Sierra Leone. Others are working in the Ivory Coast. Others are working in Ghana. In Senegal, I was headed a group to Senegal. After I did the group to the Ivory Coast, I headed the group to Senegal, and then I also headed the next year the group to Guinea. And all of these leaders had vision of what they need to do to modernize and to bring the people together and to remove tribalism. So-called tribalism is Africans not seeing the fullness of their people, but focusing in on a narrow part of the family.
It makes no sense, Dr. Jeffries, and I think coming from a Black American perspective, we understand that we're brothers and sisters. When you come over here, how you look like you Black American, and you're gonna get treated like that.
That's right.
The system of so-called white supremacy and racism is not built on which country you're from. It's built on which race you are and which continent you come from.
That's right.
And that's a very simple fact. That's not difficult to understand. And when people have troubles understanding that, I just, I speak to one of my elders because I'll be ready to be like, what is your problem? What is your problem?
Yes. Well, that's true. So we are lucky because our people did go through, for hundreds of years, a devastating enslavement. But the great thing is that we have done a great deal to emerge out of that process, where we have restored our humanity as best we can, wherever we are, whether it's in the islands of the Pacific,
that's right,
or whether it's in the South America, or certainly in North America. Even the populations of Native Americans that are in Canada have followed the example of African peoples trying to make sure that they make their demands and have those demands respected.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes. So, Dr. Jeffries, I have a question that is a little not random, but not exactly what we're discussing, but it is in kind of a way. So I'm just going to ask the question. I was talking with a friend of mine who, so my brother just got married, and he and his wife are going to Hawaii.
Yes.
Can't hear you. Sister, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'll I don't know when you stopped hearing me. My brother just got married a couple weekends ago.
Yes.
And he and his wife are going to Hawaii. And I was like, Hawaii is awesome, blah, blah, blah. So I spoke to one of my friends, because my homegirl and I, we went to Hawaii, just whatever. And I was saying that traveling to Hawaii is like traveling internationally because of the rule.
You froze again, sis. She froze up. Our brother Dennis is on.
Who was that?
That's our brother in Detroit.
Oh, okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
All right, I'm gonna just go ahead and ask my question so I won't freeze. Can you talk about the country of Hawaii, the natives who were there, the African presence that was in Hawaii, and how it really is like a different country versus a state? If you travel internationally and travel to Hawaii, some of the same rules apply in terms of what you can and cannot bring in and out of the state. So if this is a snippet of your expertise, Dr. Jeffries, can you just give us a little history on Hawaii?
Well, what we need to do is look at the larger geography, that Hawaii is a part of an archipelago. That means a number of islands come together to create that phenomena. And so that, and they're so different. The Hawaiian Islands have their particular characteristics and social organizations. But then if you go to New Caledonia, that's in that area. And so it's from, and if you go to Borneo and whatnot, so that the environment that the various islanders got themselves in, they adapted to the culture and created. So when you think of the Hawaiian Islands, you got to add a whole lot of other islands to it, and then see the different cultures. My wife's middle brother, he wanted to go into the service, and eventually, with the help of Malcolm X and whatnot, he was able to put any desire for drugs down, and the Nation of Islam encouraged him to go to Hawaii, and he did. He has been there for years. He's become a great individual helping people deal with their illnesses. My wife had a chance to go out and visit him. So it's an archipelago, meaning a series of sister islands that come together, and you have a mix of what becomes the Asian population and the African population, or the indigenous population. And now this is something that may be a little hard for people to take, but since we're talking about this stuff, we need to, Rockefeller, who put a lot of money in museums and whatnot, Rockefeller funded his son going to the various archipelagos in the Pacific, and including Borneo. And unfortunately, he was lost, and they don't know his whereabouts. And they don't know whether he violated certain sacred things and might have been removed because of that. But at any rate, Rockefeller wanted his name attached to this type of adventure and searching for knowledge. So there is a section of this great museum in New York where you have what they call the Primitive Art Museum. And they named it after Michael Rockefeller. My wife had worked in that section of the museum, and she also worked in the southern section of the museum, which is the Egyptian part of the museum. And so what has happened is that they have now linked the two. And they said that Africans peopled the islands of the Pacific, and they are also linked to the great masses on the African continent. And so they are linking, and they're producing the greatest museum, one of the greatest museums in history, will be right there in New York for us to go and see. I hope to go see it tomorrow. If I have to go into New York, I'm going to make sure I'm there. And when I go, I don't take myself. I take Dr. Clark. I drag along Dr. Ben. I take Dr. AC. I take Francis Cress Welsing. I take all of these great Black people that I knew, and I put them in one of my bags over here. The bag is right over there. I'll take about 20 books, and I'll have them share with me this great work that we have done. It's extraordinary that these great museums now are honoring Dr. Shekan Diop. He was considered a shyster. He was considered a false historian. But he turned out to be one of the greatest men walking the planet. He's the modern Imhotep. And because of his great work, I am a Jopian. Paris, I was in Switzerland learning about political science in Europe and whatnot. And I was the only black person. I was the first black person to pass the exams. No, the first American to pass the exams in 15 years. And so while I was there, you get a chance to travel around. That's how you see things. And I got a chance. I wanted to go to Paris. And Spirit told me, go to Paris. So I said, well, damn, I'm doing my serious work here in Switzerland. How are you going to send me to Paris? Go to Paris, Negro. I'm giving you your orders. So after a while, I said, follow your orders. So I left Lausanne and I went across Lake Geneva to Geneva. And then from Geneva, you pass under Mont Blanc, the biggest mountain in Europe. And then when you come out on the other side, you're in France, near Lyon, which is the middle of France. And then you take a train from Lyon up to Paris. And then from Paris, I was able to grab a subway and go into the heart of Paris, which is the left bank, and where they have the universities. And there's this enormous pillared temple. That was the senior university. And then next to it, a couple of blocks down, that was a smaller institute, but it was a college, the Collège de France, the College of France. But in between the great pillared university and the Collège de France, you had a Black Wisdom Center, and that was Présence Africaine. A Black man and a Black woman, his wife, put together one of the greatest distribution of the knowledge of Black people. And they became, for me, my partners. Cheikh Anta Diop in his great book, Civilization Barbarism, which I helped get translated, he dedicates it to this man, father figure in his life, and it's such a fantastic dedication that I always read it when I, end anything important that I'm doing. But he wasn't alone. This spirit of Africans coming into Europe and getting this knowledge and then bonding with each other was passed on. The French-speaking islands, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Aimé Césaire, the great writer, poet, and genius, he was there. And the same thing, he worked hard, like the people in Présence Africaine, to bring this, they call it negritude. And they didn't want to say Blacks or Negroes or slaves. They wanted to say negritude. And so those so-called negritudes also are a blend of the Native Americans. The islands were peopled by Native Americans. Christopher Columbus came there, and the biggest mistake the Native Americans was to think that he might have been some kind of god because he was dressed all funny. He was doing funny things, and so they offered him something to eat, drink. They should have killed they should have eliminated him or chased him out. But he saw that they are people who could be used and abused. But they abused them so that the genocide of the Native Americans, hundreds, millions of Native Americans were killed coming into contact with white diseases. And the people who could resist white diseases, who were the foundation people of the human family, are Africans. So when the Europeans realized that Black folk was not going to die as easily as the Native Americans, they were going to survive. Then you had the transatlantic and the South Atlantic enslavement process. And so I'm so glad you got into some of this stuff, and I hope that just the term Ahat rings in your heart and soul. It does in mine. And one of the most beautiful things was to go to Ethiopia and to meet the Africans there who had to fight for their life against the European. And so Haile Selassie had to call upon his indigenous forces in the mountains of Ethiopia to beat back the fascists under the Italian dictator, Mussolini.
Mhm.
So that, interesting enough, there were some airmen that they needed to help cement the victory. And Tuskegee was where they were training Black people to fly planes. And so those Tuskegee airmen went to Ethiopia to help the emperor solidify the victory that allowed him to preserve his great nation, the mother nation. Ethiopia is considered one of the early nations.
That's right.
And when you go there, you see the stone churches carved out and Lalibela carved out of rock. And you can see, and the emperor himself, we had a chance, there's a great picture of my wife taking a picture of the emperor as he is greeting heads of state that came to the big conference. And so 7 heads of state are being greeted by the emperor, and my wife is taking the picture. And we've had not only that type of experience with him, we also had Dr. John Henry Clark, this little diminutive figure like Dr. Van, they're small in stature, but they're giants in terms of the knowledge. And Dr. Clark organized us to go to Los Angeles and set up and get a place in this African Studies Association. They didn't want to do it, so they balked. And so we threatened them that if we do not get in, we'll disturb your meetings. And so I was part of that group and glad to be in, because that's how we got things at City College. It wasn't there because it was going to be a good addition to the City College service after World War II. It serviced the Jewish community. So they wasn't ready to give up their special place in City College. But we said, if you don't give it up, we're going to take it. And they took over. And so when I was teaching at City College, the first Black course that a great Black teacher, Al Ballard, had taught, they said, well, Dr. Jeffries, Al Ballard is going to be asked to head SEEK, which is the Aid for Black and Latin Children and Poor Whites. And so that we want you to teach his course. So I took his course and redid it and came up with a fantastic course. And by the time I started teaching in January, by February, the students started taking my classes and starting getting riled up with Black history and whatnot. So they decided to take over. And they did. And they kept it under their control for several months until a negotiation was made. They even locked the president, and he was a nice guy, Gallagher. They locked him up in the South Campus in his house, which was at the gate, and they let him go out. They said, no, we're letting your wife go out to get groceries, and then she can come on back. But we're holding you hostage. I mean, that was the terminology. We're holding you hostage, and she can bring back the groceries. Eventually, under the Jeffries reign at City College, that guardhouse, that house at the gate, was taken over by one of my staff members, Geraldine Price, who turned it into the house for the children, for the babies. And so, and looking at all of this history, you just have to say, wow. Child Development Center. And she set the pattern for what a Child Development Center was for the whole CUNY campus. You're talking about 20 schools. The State University has 60 or something ridiculous, 160 campuses. But we got our share And it was a great moment. I spent 3 years setting up the Black Studies at San Jose. I thought that was going to be a life job. And the Rosicrucians have their base there. But then when my uncle got killed after he hit the Irish sweepstakes in Newark, New Jersey, when he tied up his Doberman pitchers, which he was given a walk, and he took the bridle off of them, the mouthpiece, some dope fiends came in and blew him away. So I had lost a very powerful uncle. Then my wife's father had to retire. So with the two key men in the family in trouble, I said, let's go back. Let's leave San Jose, this paradise gained, and we'll come back one day. And so we went back to New York, and but we never went back. Once we got into New York and got into this heavy Black studies and changing the curriculum and all the things that we were asked to do, we've gone out there. I mean, I kept the house out there for a long time. It was a house built by Frank Lloyd Wright, inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. It was in that house that I trained John Carlos. John Carlos, who when I was in Los Angeles with Dr. Clark, and when we said, to hell with these white folks, and we said, we'll see you next year and we'll be prepared for you next year, which we did. We took over the conference next year. But in the meantime, one of our friends, a good friend of my wife and I, Hal Weaver, he kept telling me that, Len, there's a lot of stuff going on in Mexico, and we need to go down there. I said, Hal, why are you coming with this BS about going down to Mexico? We just had enough money to make it here to Los Angeles. And so we can't worry about no Mexico. And then again, he come at me again. Len, we got to go. I said, how? I don't have enough money. He said, you don't understand. I said, don't understand what? That for $25 extra on your New York to Los Angeles ticket, you can go to Mexico City. I said, say that again. For $25 you could go. I said, let's go. And we went down to Mexico City. And fortunately, they kicked John Carlos out. I was in the Hotel Diplomatique, and I went up. My room was on the 5th floor. And when the door opened, there was John Carlos, was a fifth of Johnny Walker, going down the elevator. He had to leave the Olympic Village. And when he did, it opened the world up to me, because everybody knew of these fellows who held their fists up and did all that stuff. And they wanted to identify with them because Mexico had killed 200 or 300 students in a student riot for the Olympics. And they didn't want the Olympics blocked, so they suppressed the death of those students. But they didn't want student rallies and students this and that. But when I was there looking like John Carlos, the students ran after me. I had to run from the women. I didn't speak enough Spanish to say, no, I'm no, I'm no. They just wanted kisses and hugs and whatnot. And so some of the great things that I did see was a white boy. And when he was doing his Flosby flop, diving over the high bar, he got, every time he hit the ground and bounced up, he raised up a Black Power fist. When the Jamaican team ran faster than anybody had ever run and set records, when they went across the line, they raised their fist. When Bob Beamon leaped 12 feet of some ridiculous, the longest leap in Olympic history, after he hit the ground, he raised up his fist. And so the Australian fellow, he wanted to be a part of it. He didn't raise up his fist, but he gave one of his gloves to Tommy Smith. So Jimmy has a glove on, and the white fellow gave one of his gloves so that they both had gloves on. And the fantastic thing was the last event. And, I didn't speak Spanish. I speak a little Portuguese. I learned Portuguese well. In fact, the teacher who taught me, she said, you'll never be able to speak it like you should, Brazilian Portuguese, because it's a guttural thing. And you've learned grand in French and Rhin in Spanish, but in Portuguese it's rangi. So, but she said, "You good?" And so people said, "Dr. J, you knew 3 languages. You better damn sure I know it." And because I love learning, and so here we are, 80,000 people screaming and yelling, and they know what's happening, but I'm in the dark. But I didn't mind being in the dark because I knew it was something good. And sure enough, after 26 miles or however long that Olympic course is, into the stadium came a black man, a young black man, kicking it, but not kicking it with shoes on. He was running with no shoes on. One of the greatest moments in my life to be there to see 80,000 people leaping up and jumping, praising this black man. And from that moment on, the East Africans, the Tanzanians, the Kenyans, the Ethiopians, the Somalians, all have been great runners, following that example of that Ethiopian who ran into that damn stadium and shook it up, you know. So I'm saying life is but a dream. And once you taste it, you got to enjoy it.
Yeah. Now, sorry, everything Dr. Jeffrey said was amazing. Well, I'm gonna have to interject because
Okay.
you have somebody on here that didn't just start one Black Studies program from scratch. He started 2. And so we have to understand when you talk about Black Studies, it is like he said, we have to move beyond the Black Studies model because to the African Renaissance. The Black Studies model was an important period in our African life stream.
Right.
We have to understand how important it was because Black Studies was not just about the Black Studies department. You heard him mention the Child Development Center.
That's right.
The Black Studies is a convergence of the civil rights, Black Power movement, the student movement, and African intellectualism coming to a zenith in HBCUs and European institutions.
And
But for
also,
the African Renaissance, we have to take it out of the Europeans' hands because what they've done is take departments like Dr. Jeffries and demote them into programs,
right,
which takes away the budget lines to hire staff and
yes,
faculty,
That's right.
train in the discipline.
And
And then they've
efficacy of it.
also, what they've also begun doing is in the institutions that they control, they begin putting people that look like us, but don't have an African mindset in place.
right.
Meaning our brothers and sisters who we love in the LGBTQ community. If you look around the country at the different institutions, whether it's museums, whether it's the programs, whether it's the departments, they're putting people whose focus is not African Renaissance into these places. Whereas before they try to use Marxist or communist, or they might have tried to use feminists. Now they're trying to use the LGBTQ community to break down what was built. Because you have to understand the Black Studies departments in Africana Studies, African American Studies, they weren't just departments. They affected the whole of the college atmosphere.
And the whole community.
Right.
We taught classes at Abyssinian Baptist Church. I developed a concept called the communiversity, African education in the communiversity and the university. And Reverend Butts, who had been teaching, I got him a job, and his wife, a lovely wife, she was a student in our class. Reverend Butts was able to let us use not the sanctuary, that's sacred. That has the cross, the Ethiopian cross that Haile Selassie brought personally. That's in that Abyssinian church. But what Reverend Butts gave us directory, and we had 500 people in there, and those 500 people bought the fee was free, but you had to buy books. You had to buy a book on Africa and a book on the Caribbean or Black America. So when you finished your 52-week course, you'd have 100 of the most important books on Black history. That was done way beyond any concept of Black studies. It was our African understanding of how we need to work with our African peoples.
And that wasn't just at Abyssinian Baptist Church. That was at Bethany Baptist
That's
Church.
true.
That was at Convent Avenue Baptist
That's
Church.
right.
That was in the bars in Harlem.
That's right.
We have to understand that this movement of Black studies is beyond the normal academic. Because of Black studies departments, sociology changed, the welfare training changed, the psychological and psychiatric training changed. Because of Black studies, the Sophie Davis program. What the Sophie Davis is
It
the
was,
nursing
it was
program.
the medical school.
Sophie
There was a
Davis
medical
medical
school.
program.
Can I jump in? Can you show your face? And somebody, and Teak Wellbeing asked, who is the brother? They're asking who you are.
Yes. And luckily, Charles is actually right. We forced them to expand City College into City University because the state has the universities. That's Stony Brook and all the rest of them. At the city universities are supposed to have a more limited scope. However, we said no. We want a law school, and they came up with a law program. We want a medical school. They came up with a medical program. We want a new music center. So they built the music center, a stage with the type of Broadway staging and whatnot. And so we were able to take part in that. When we had our big activities, one of the biggest one in my life was Nelson Mandela coming to City College. And we were sitting in the Davis Center because the Leonard Davis brothers were in insurance and they financed a lot of this. You had the Leonard Davis medical thing. You had the Leonard Davis musical. They built a world-class theater. And so we're sitting in the first row, Dr. John Henry Clark and myself, because we wanted to be on top of Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela came on the stage to do the Ted Koppel show. And Ted Koppel was polite, asking him some serious questions, but then he had to get pushed to the one question: what do you think about Fidel Castro and the Cuban Revolution? And Nelson Mandela looked at him and said, we stay with our enemies, no matter how long and how difficult it is. Our friends are permanent friends. And the place was silent. And then Nelson said, don't you have anything to respond to that, Mr. Koppel? He was embarrassed like anybody in the world. And then Nelson really showed how human he was. When it was all over, he saw a little Black kid in the front. He said he told that youngster to come up on the stage, and he did a whole special hug and relationship with this young kid to show that we're about the family. You can come in with your garbage, but it ain't gonna stick on us. And so, of course, Winnie did come, and she became a part of our thing in Newark. The Child Development Center, she participated and came in. It was named after Regent Adelaide Sanford. But Winnie came several times. My wife and I have a beautiful picture of Winnie in the middle and Rosalind and I on the side. In fact, one day, Betty Dotson, she was just on the program that we just did with Dr. Amak for VAPA. And Betty, when we talked earlier, she reminded me of what I did with Winnie. In other words, Winnie flew into Newark Airport or LaGuardia to come in to be a part of what we're doing. And they wouldn't let her get off the plane. And they were questioning her bodyguards. Who are these people? And she said, I'm Winnie Mandela. I need protection. I mean, where have you been? And so they told us that Winnie won't be able to come off, about 40 of us. So Betty Dotson looked at me and she said, Dr. J, it's your time now. Go on and do it. And sure enough, we did the libation. We brought some African juju in that space, in that place.
Right.
And before you knew it, they brought her in. But the question was, she can't come to America without bodyguards. But so then when I put some more juju on the flame, here come the bodyguards, 3 of them. I said, go on, the African Holy Ghost. Betty she just mentioned that to me about us using whatever spiritual power we think we have. It makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
Then going into no down, toe down, down. We need to go a little past that, and get
Yes, we
into
do.
message in the music like it came out of Motown, and with all those and the sisters, and even our little boy, he had skills, so don't be Michael. You beating up on the gay community? No, Jimmy Baldwin and the rest of them. Give the gay community a break.
I'm not beating up on them.
Okay, but you shouldn't have even mentioned it.
Baldwin said, "I am black and I am gay, but above all, I am black."
That's
so we
right.
need LGBTQ brothers and sisters with that mindset.
Okay, so you cleaned it up. So good. Yeah. You cleaned it up. Otherwise,
it's size like, oh Lord, Charles.
Listen to everybody who may or may not understand the relationship between Dr. Jeffries and Asukile. It's like father and son, brothers. So I'm not going to get into while I am monitoring it, because this is Tuesday Talk. Y'all, that's between y'all. You straighten it up. And I understand what Brother Charles is saying. Separate from anything else, we need to put race first. And that's separate from all the little tribal nonsense that Dr. Jeffries and I were talking about before as well. And I personally am anti-feminism. And I was that when I was a teenager, before I even understood all of the intricacies of feminism, before I had ever even heard the word Kemet. And when I still believed Jesus was real, even though I knew he was black, like this. So I'm saying that straight up. That is one of the most divisive interventions of nonsense that ever entered into the black family was feminism. Now, that's me saying that. And if you want to talk about it, you can DM me. Maybe we can have a show on it. I don't know.
But see, here's the solution. Mm-hmm. Raise Africanism to its highest level. It will neutralize all of the other stuff. I had an interview with Jimmy Baldwin, and in fact, at one point, I had dated his sister. She lived on 127th Street in the St. Nicholas Project. Mm-hmm. She eventually found a real African from Sierra Leone, Khalifa Smart, and he was and they had several daughters and sons. But he joined and became a leader of the Operation Crossroads Africa program. That's the program that a black man from the bottoms of Memphis, Tennessee, put together to introduce Africa to us. He married Ralston and I. He became like the fathers, African fathers that we needed. And so this whole concept that we are playing with, we got to use it, because you can't lose with the stuff I use. That's what Reverend Ike used to say.
That's right.
I applied it to this knowledge and whatnot. So Jimmy Baldwin said when we were in that car, and I have the interview, that this is not like Africa. But what he meant was, because at that time he was preparing a 60-page, one of the largest articles ever to go into one of those big magazines. And what he was saying was that Dakar was like Morocco, Casablanca. It's off of the desert, and that's right. In order to hit the rainforest in Dakar, you got to go south, past Kaolack into the Casamance, and then the Gambia rainforest and the Guinea rainforest, and all of them float together. So Baldwin was just expressing the fact that he was glad to be there, and he was glad to see that Senegal was as African as can be, because you see those people, Senegal, the people are tall, and Jimmy was small, but you see these tall people with these robes kicking it. I mean, the Senegal, you can't keep up with them. They are moving. They got a culture that's alive and well. And so that's what we need to tap into. Understanding our people came from being nothing, from being ground into the earth as having no contribution, not even human. And we have proved beyond anybody's doubt that's serious that we are the center of humanity. And
That's
that
right.
intend to remain.
That's right. The center and the origin. So I just want to make it very clear that that we can jump on anything, any tool of division and divisiveness, because they're introduced into our communities regularly.
Yes.
And when you look at the history of African people, and when we were and are and will be the most successful, well, you can't look into the history in the future, but you have to know the history to guide the future. And if you look at our history, we did the best when we were united as African people first. So,
Yes.
you know, like I was saying, I knew Dr. Jeffries and Brother Asukile were going to work that out. And whatever. There are a lot of things that divide us only if we believe that it's an actual division.
But here's the thing that around Brother Asakili, Charles.
Right.
When they needed to let the people know that if you mess with Dr. Jeffries, you mess with Professor Scobie, you mess with Sister Bain, you mess with Professor Price, there's a price to pay.
Yeah.
So they organized 40 to 60 young men to be a part of the Sons of Africa. So they were a part of everything we planned, everything we did. And then Marin Bani, who was at Hunter College, they organized the Daughters of Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was an education. Charles was not the first. You had others that traveled with us. Brother Reggie, one of the first of our sons, he was not only given the responsibility when I took my nephews, I took Dr. Clark's son, I took Brother Small's son. All of them were 10 and 12 years old. They were young. And but Reggie was given the special responsibility of looking after them. And the kids will do things. And sure enough, they had this paddling thing that you could paddle from the basin of the hotel. And then there was a little passageway where you could go out toward the ocean. And when I saw those kids with a little paddle thing going out, I said, oh my God. I said, suppose something happened and they got pulled out into the ocean. Dr. Clark's son, my brother's son, Professor Small's son, how the hell could I come back home? I'd have to go in that water and go down there with them so that they'd have some elder underwater with them in the drowning. But these young men grew up with that unusual experience, and it stood them well.
So, Dr. Jeffries, we're approaching up to the second hour, and I do want to ask this one question, which I think is a good one in conclusion. This one is from Dr. Daniel LaRoche, and the question is, Dr. J, what are your top suggestions to continue African education today in the United States and globally? I think that's a great question, and any answer that lists organizations, etc., I will update the flyer or the announcement to this Tuesday Talk, and I will put it there, because as we know with Tuesday Talk, we have to learn and then do, and not just show up, but learn and do. Like and subscribe, and also donate. but learn and do. So I'm going to ask the question one more time, and then Dr. Jeffries, if you could just have the last word on that. The question is, Dr. J, what are your top suggestions to continue African education today in the U.S. and globally?
Well, certainly it is the key question. And we have to constantly remind ourselves that's the question that we have to ask. And clearly, we are on a heavy curve of learning and passing out passing this action on. This, for example, is one of the great books that our brother Van Sertima produced. And Van Sertima was not a nationalist, but he was able to get together with Dr. Asa Hilliard and other great scholars and produce works like this. Now, this is one of the paintings on the walls of the temples, and you see Black men in their regalia as opposed to the image of others. So what they were able to do was to take this volume, Egypt Revisited, and put all of us in there. I have an article in there. Diop has an article in there. Asa Hilliard, Dr. Clark has an article. Runoko Rashidi. And so you've got to pass this knowledge on. And my nephew, Dr. Hassan Kwame Jeffries, and this is, my mother was light and bright. My father was in between. My grandfather was chocolate. I mean, Papa was together. He had melanin. And I was born on his birthday, so I take a lot of that melanin. But here is Hassan, my nephew. His brother is the congressman who's the fourth or fifth in the Democratic power base in the U.S. government. Brilliant lawyer, graduated at the top of his class in NYU Law School. He was the graduation speaker. He graduated from Morehouse, the top Black school for men. He graduated with all A's except one B. And at his first 2 years, he showed me his report card and he had a B. So I said, well, what are you trying to disgrace the family? Where did this B come from? I said, what course did you have? He said, religion. I said, religion? He said, your mother has been taking you to church ever since you could blink or walk. And he said, Uncle Lenny, I should have got an A in that class. I said, if you should have got an A, you don't shoulda, woulda, coulda, go tell that professor he made a mistake and have him change it. And he did go. And the professor said, I will change it. But the professor's busy doing a lot of things. He didn't worry about it. He didn't change it. But Hassan wasn't worried about it. It was my problem. Hassan wasn't worried about it at all. He knew students. And in fact, I had an experience at that time, which was there was a Black fellow from Plainfield, New Jersey, who had all A's for his 4 years. And he was the first Black student to get a Cecil Rhodes scholarship. And so I was still mad that my nephew was going to be the graduation speaker, as if, that was important. But as I came through the crowd, for their graduation, they got 10,000 people with the couple of hundred graduating, whatever. But at any rate, I passed through this mob of Africanness. Mm-hmm. What is going on here? And wherever I stepped, I was ready to step on a sister or a brother or a baby, and all of them was wearing African clothes. I said, this is something. And I was like a hound dog, just, oh, goodness, I was just having me a good time going through. Little did I realize that Plainfield family were in African clothes. It was their son who won the Rhodes Scholarship. And I was so delighted when I learned that. I told his brother, I said, when your brother finishes with the press, because the press from everywhere wanted to take this first Black Rhodes Scholarship from a Black school. And so when his brother saw me, so he came up to me, he greeted me, and then I said, well, you all get your accolades and enjoy it, but tell your brother I'd like to give him a special, send-off. And sure enough, he went down and told his brother. His brother left the press, came running up to me, and went straight down on his knees with his brother. And that's the type of to do in terms of family that we need to be about. He did go and he did well, and he's doing well. and so this one is doing well too. This Hassan Jeffries, and he has mastered his own wear. Every once in a while, he'll wear an African robe and whatnot, but he's got suspenders, and he matches them up. And so this is a course that's being taught African American history over the nation. I watched him for 8 hours the other night. I could not put it down. I was learning from him, and he sat there so cool, so calm, so together. And so they call it the Great Courses. And this one is African American history from emancipation through Jim Crow. And there is Booker T sitting on the cover. And so these are the type of things. It's called the Great Courses. It's expensive, though. My wife wants to put it in her classes. She's still teaching at the School of Visual Arts.
Okay.
And, but, you know, and this is the 36 Olympics. Oh, my goodness. We were just talking about it. There's Jesse Owens in the 36 Olympics.
Mm-hmm.
He ran Hitler's dream of a Superman into the ground. Hitler had to leave the stadium. Since his Superman had been beat up, he left the stadium.
Right.
You know. So
Well,
Booker T, W.E.B., and Marcus Garvey, that's my pablum. And I've tried to live by it, and I've tried to pass it on, and it's been great. Compare Shekinah Diop with Henry Louis Skip the Truth Gates. And I don't want to take anything out on Gates. He's a master exploiter of white folks with money. But he was on my wife's dissertation committee for her PhD at Yale. So out of respect for his respect for my wife and actually love for my wife, I won't beat him up like I should because I'm a respecter of people that, you know, love as opposed to hate. And I know that if you're on somebody's dissertation committee, you could help them get over the line or you could block them. And wherever I have gone, there's always been a particular type of individual who is jealous of this black man or black youngster or black young man and attempted to destroy or block him. But it has not worked. It just has not worked. Person tried to block me from my dissertation after I had put in this fantastic on Ivory Coast economic development. And he had done a dissertation on Ivory Coast and Ghana, which was cool. But I had gone deep to the people.
mm-hmm.
My thing is to go to the villages and whatnot.
Right.
And when I went to one of the villages in the Ivory Coast on the Ghana border, that's when the chief, it said on the map that this was a model village. So I said, if it's a model village, I need to go up there and see what it's all about. So I got on the car, or rented the car, I got on a taxi and a road taxi. And I went up to a Bangaroo, and then from a Bangaroo, you go to this small village and Niable. And the chief saw this young black man, and he just adopted me. And he said, we talked and talked. He said, I want you to come into my special space. And his wife cooks the food and she brings it in. But that's a special space for the men. And so he had me there and he asked me what I wanted to be. And I said, I wanted to be this and a lawyer and this and that. And he said, well, it's too late for you to go back to the big town. You got to stay with me. My nephew is a pharmacist. He has a nice big place across the road, and that's where you will stay. From that point on, I was absorbed into the Rosicrucian movement. And the Rosicrucian movement is international. It's everywhere. And it comes out of Akhenaten and his great mother T, and his great wife Nefertari, and his great father Amenhotep III. And so we have the Shrine of Ma'at, but there are other deeper shrines that we need to tap into because we're part of a larger phenomenon. So you had Nkrumah built a new city and all the things that went with it. You had Ufotwane built a new city with the shrine of the Black Madonna at its heart. Then Nigerians have Lagos in the south, Igbo land in the middle, Hausa land in the north, and you can go even further up north. And so it's divided up. But to unify it, what did it do? It followed that same pattern. It created a super new city, a planned new city. And so we need to look at that phenomena of the new city of God. And God knows Nigeria needs it because one of the things that the Nigerians know how to do, if you got a pair of pants, you better have them tight around your waist because they may slip in there and snatch your wallet.
Mm.
Now, Dr. J, why are you so hard on the Nigerians? I'm not. I brought the Nigerians to City College for 3 years, and we planned an international conference in Ife in Yoruba land from the City College, and we took a whole lot of people there. But you just have to be cautious. When you have so many people piled on top of each other, they get, rough. And then when you have the leader, Sonny Abacha, have his jet fly out every week loaded full of gold and diamonds, hiding it somewhere else. I mean, a good Nigerian spirit and juju should have taken that brother out of here a long time ago. But that's not for you or I to decide. Eventually, Nigeria has gone through those problems, and they're a power source because there's so much people power in Nigeria. It's like when you go to Brazil and you see a city like Rio laid out along the beaches, but then when you go to see the southern capital, it's nothing but construction, great buildings. It's like the Chicago of the South. So I'm saying tap into some of this knowledge and you can transform yourself and then pass it on to these little ones, and then don't hesitate to go to Africa. My mother, because she was Eastern Star, she went without hesitation. And so, and then when we realized that my grandfather, he, on my father's side, he has the symbol of the Masons, right? He was the head of the Masons. In fact, his oldest son, David, had killed his cousin by mistake. And what the Rosicrucian, or what the Masons worked out was that this was not a hate crime or a murder or etc. This was an accident because they did a lot of hunting. And so the Masons allowed for David to leave, never to come back. And so he left Georgia, went to Ohio, where part of our family had moved to. Then he went up to Detroit. That's where he was initiated into the Masons. And then he went out to California for 50-something years. 3 or 4 of his peers, his brothers and sisters, went out to join him. So they created a branch of our family out in Los Angeles. Honduras, 11472 Honduras. They had a big house in the front. They had a smaller house that they could rent out in the back. And David taught at a Firestone or whatever plant. He taught for 50 something years. I have a picture of him receiving his medal and stuff for 50 years of having worked on one of the big construction
Mhm.
it's out there. So that's why we need to tap into the positive and neutralize the negative.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dr. Jeffries. It looks like Charles is saying something to you in the background.
No, he's just tired.
Oh, he's just
No,
tired.
I'm in
Okay.
the back working.
Oh,
Well, I just want to say thank you, Dr. Jeffries, for joining us, and thank you, Brother Asakile, for jumping in and giving us your input as well. And as we all know, this is a bit of an ongoing conversation, and as we continue to craft our answer, we just get closer and closer to the actual answer and to actual liberation. So definitely knowledge, definitely adopting our African mindset, definitely knowing our history to guide our choices for the future. And it's not going to happen overnight, but it is currently happening, and it's going to continue to happen. So I just kind of want to leave the people with on an up note in terms of our progress and where we're going. And sometimes it's kind of hard to see stuff when you're right in the middle of it.
well,
I see you have something else you want to share.
you better believe it. And if I don't do it right, she'll come down from heaven and swap me on my ass. In fact, she never really had to beat us because she would have to say, I'm going to tell your father that you've been acting up. My father was 6'4" with that big hand. We never wanted that hand to come alongside of us except in love and affection. But my mother was able to go to Africa with us. And this was my first trip to Africa when we went to Ghana, through Ivory Coast and Guinea and all. I only had, when this white leader, this German, wanted us to go up to Timbuktu, again, I didn't have enough money to go up to Timbuktu. You had to put in another $85. I went and spent the whole summer in Africa with $15 in my pocket. And the $15 was spent on buying this symbol of Ivory Coast, which is the elephant. And it's actual, become a family heirloom because I gave it to my mother. She gave it to her DC, the one who took care of us, our third mother, and DC's mother was our second mother. But my mother kept it in a special place. And when she passed, I said, it's going to go around. It's going to come back. And so eventually I'm going to pass it on to Hassan. So he's got 3 little angels, the loveliest young ladies you can imagine out there in Ohio. And so this will be passed on to them with other things. So that's what we have to do. Make sure we pass it on.
That's right.
You know.
Ashe. That's right. Pass it on. Absolutely pass it on. And continue to convene with your brothers and sisters and tear down these paper thin walls that seem like insurmountable monuments, which they are not, and continue to work on yourself. Get into your own African spiritual practice, whatever that may be, or however you put it together. And I just want to thank Dr. Jeffries, Brother Asukile, and everybody who's joined us and continues to join and support Tuesday Talk. And I'm going to update the announcement for this particular Tuesday Talk with books, etc., and also how we can support Dr.
No, she froze.
She was going to say support us, but we understand that. Yes.
Coming back. I'm back.
Yeah. All right. Hey.
And the way that we can support the Jeffries, both of them, Dr. Rosin Jeffries as well as Dr. Leonard Jeffries. Okay, so wherever you saw the flyer, look for it tomorrow. Your girl is a little sleepy. I have other stuff to do after Tuesday Talk when I get off tonight, but I definitely will update that information soon. Okay. So thank you for
yes. But you, this has been a nice hour or two, and you don't show anywhere for worrying about all of this and whatnot. So we want you to start taking some some photos of yourself so we can have a souvenir of your smile and that ooze, that African oozing that you possess.
It's okay.
And it's wonderful. Hey, look at that smile. Goodness gracious alive. Wow.
Well, thank you, Dr. Jeffries. I'll send over some photos. Okay, so, and on that note, I just want to say thank you all, and I will see you next Tuesday. And after I end the broadcast, Dr. Jeffries and Asukile, please stay backstage, okay? Thank you so much, and my aunt Hotep.
All right. Beautiful.
All righty, I'm ending. Let's see. Okay.